Recently, you may have seen the teaser for Quake 6, just H6 with the Quake symbol, but I've heard other rumors from various sources that there is something in the works. Exciting, I know, but it got me thinking. Quake still gets attention. As you might have seen, my videos about it were getting hundreds of thousands of views, but very few people play the game, despite a lot of positives, like no aim assist, being true aim based, without recoil and moving the crosshair away from center like in Apex, and also just fluid movement, with speed to your strafe so you can actually dodge properly, without gimmicks like tap strafing, again like in Apex. And I'd still rather play Quake, so I'm wondering, what would it take to make Quake 6 successful? Clearly there's a huge market for single player games, as we saw with the return of Doom, but Doom multiplayer, despite being an interesting take on Quake style play, wasn't too popular. I actually had a lot of fun in it though. Despite the weaker movement, the game elements were great, especially with becoming one of the demons as a power up. Such a cool idea. I think Quake 6 will be a success just because of the single player, but I'd love to see it succeed with multiplayer too. And this is where we bring up some debates around Quake champions, because a lot of the old school players hated the idea of champions in the game, but modern audiences tend to be playing games with them, so it makes sense to put them in. I'm not going to talk about that here, it's been done to death. My question is, do you appease the old players, or do you appeal to new? Because if you make your old players unhappy, you're making your core unhappy. But that core is so small, business-wise, it doesn't make sense to appeal to them. That said, they can be a loud minority, so they generate a fair bit of negativity, as we saw with Quake Champions, which is actually a pretty great game, way better than most, especially these days as most of the issues have been fixed. It was released too early, that rubber banding, the stutters, no reg and all that, yeah, I get why people quit. It was a nightmare, super frustrating, but Apex has issues like that too. Every time we have a new season, we get crashes and all kinds of issues, and people still play it. So I don't think that was actually the reason so many people quit. I think it's the gameplay. Arena shooters just don't seem to have the appeal, but battle royales are running their course now too. I think a Quake battle royale could be fun, don't get me wrong, but I also think they need a new game mode of some sort. So let's talk game modes. When I introduce people to Quake, it's through Instagib, because everyone can have fun in Instagib, and even if you're new, you can still get kills, because you just point and shoot at people, and they die with one shot. It's whoever sees who first, and you just respawn straight away. So there's none of this, oh no I gotta wait, or I gotta walk for ages to get back into battle stuff. You're straight back into the action. I do think it's important to include Instagib as a mode for that reason, but Team Deathmatch? I can't stand playing that. It was good in Doom because of the demons and stuff, but otherwise it's just a terrible mode. And the same is true for normal deathmatch too. Both those modes are based on randomness. Spawning without a proper weapon, and getting killed because the other has a rocket launcher, is not a skill for the other player or fun for the person losing the fight. I honestly wouldn't want to play that, just like I didn't want to play it in Quake Champions. And the loadout system in Doom actually did save that. So even if you died in deathmatch or team deathmatch, you still had your weapons, so you could still fight. And I'm saying this as someone with a lot of Quake experience. Yes, others will say differently, everyone has opinions, I get it. But the fact of the matter is, these modes aren't going to sell the game. You're appealing to a minority of a minority. It is super lazy game design too. They're modes that were created what, 30 years ago? People have moved on, we need something different. They can be good as warm-ups, but that's about it. Sacrifice was like a mashup of two modes that no one really played, so I don't think that was a great idea. And it wasn't good to watch. That said, it was kind of fun to play. I didn't mind it. Capture the flag was boring in Quake 3 and it didn't work with the champions. But it was so much fun in Quake 2. Why? Because you had to control quad damage, power shield, and the tech power-ups, which were health regen, speed up your rate of fire, double your damage, and shield the damage. And you could share them with your team. In fact, in a competition match, the fact I managed to get double damage away from the enemy and take it back to my defenders was most likely the reason we won. The strategy and teamwork was super cool, and it had grapple hook, so you could still get the flag captures and move around the map quickly. You didn't have to take the fights, you could just escape, even straight off the spawn. If Quake 6 went back to that style of capture the flag, I'd be down to see if it could get a following. But that's me being a selfish Quake 2 CTF player. If I think about it from a business perspective, I think they need something really fresh. I came up with the idea of like a tug of war, with single player enemies in multiplayer, kind of like in League of Legends. So it becomes a pretty big war zone, with human players being the dominant forces. And even if you're new to the game and struggle against other players, you can still help your team by killing AI, which helps you practice the mode and refine your aiming and movement skills. So eventually you get good enough and you can challenge the human players too. I'll leave a link to that game mode idea in the description. I just did a video on it. A fair few people said they'd play it, and I like the idea of marrying the single player to the multiplayer in that regard. seemed like a natural progression for Quake, but that's just one idea. And people question having game-controlled characters in a competitive game, despite the success of League of Legends. Still, I'd like to see a new mode that multiplayer is based around, along with instagib, or modes that can bring the casuals in. But let's go a bit deeper. What makes Quake so great? Why do we still play it? And what is actually being played in Quake? These days, I only play Quake Live Clan Arena. Most people in Australia play the same. Only a few people still duel. There's more duels in Quake Champions, but that's more the pro scene. I think duel is fine. It is great fun to watch on stream. It's kind of like the tennis of the gaming world. I just don't find it fun to play, because I want to do cool moves and shoot stuff, not remember times of items or do math. But anyway, Clan Arena is the best to play in my opinion, and it's heavily focused on aim and movement, which admittedly isn't that interesting compared to the strategy of Apex Legends, but it's so fun being able to rock jump around and do cool shots, and really test your accuracy, because you actually hit where you're aiming, without all the recoil and whatever. If Apex Legends had Quake movement and weapons, and no aim assist on controllers, I'd probably be super into it. So does Quake need to add that complexity of Apex Legends, with the purity of its aim and movement? Or can they come up with something even better? Would a brand new mode be what Quake needs to make it successful? Can arena shooters even make a comeback? To get the answers, I think we need to ask more questions. Like, why are you even playing games at this point? What do you find the most fun? Is it teamwork and hanging with friends? Or is it testing your skills to see how good you can get? Is it to make money with competition or streaming? The challenge of learning new things? Or just something to do? And if that's the case, how do you choose which game? And in those questions, you'll probably find the answer to what Quake 6 needs to do. But I thought it was an interesting conversation to have anyway. So let me know in the comments what you'd like to see and why, and what you think Quake needs to be successful. Also, if you think Quake Champions failed because the old school players were too good at it and scared off the new guys, as someone who just learned how to play Apex Legends in the last 2 years, I can tell you now, that game has way more to learn and is way more complex. It has way more hurdles and is overall way harder to actually play. Quake really tests your ability to aim properly, and is more about individual performance, sure. But are you really going to try to tell me that learning to strafe jump is harder than tap strafing, wall bouncing, mantle jumping, super gliding and all that? That aiming weapons to fire directly where you shoot them is harder than remembering all the recoil patterns, bullet travel time, and drop? That learning 9 weapons is harder than remembering how, 30 weapons fire? Apex Legends was so hard to learn against people who had been playing for years already, many of which are using aim assist on controller that just don't miss you, and yet I still stuck with it, as others did too. Why? Because it was fun, and it was interesting, and it's still got a pretty solid player base, much better than Quake. So no, I'm not buying this notion that Quake is too hard to learn, or the older players are too good. You can learn that game in the same amount of time as Apex, probably less. If the game is fun, people will play it. And Apex doesn't have server browsers either. All the reasons we thought Quake failed, Apex has done the same things. So I don't think that's it, I think it's a game mode. But that is my main question to you. Keeping in mind what I've said, how do you think Quake could become fun to a bigger audience? My theory is game mode. The most appealing thing to me about Apex Legends is the Trios Battle Royale. It's absolutely loaded with strategy and things to learn. So while I hate a lot about it these days, the core game is super interesting and pretty fun. And that's what I think Quake needs. Quake is still my favorite, it's just not interesting enough for people to play these days. So yes, I think Quake 6 will be a big success with the single player, just like with Doom, but for multiplayer to succeed, it needs something really new and interesting. So those are my thoughts, what are yours? And yes, it is just speculation, maybe we don't see Quake 6. Maybe it is just an in-house joke. I'm leaning toward it's true though, that's why I'm making this video. And the fact they even put that in there, in a serious video, means I think it's time to start getting a bit hyped. So I'll have to do some more videos in the future on these topics, but for now, check out my mouse design and mousepad from Xtrify, sub, like and share, and I'll catch you in the next.